This is Journeys in Podcasting, a late lunch edition. Today we're going to be talking about real-time cases, case studies at the upper ed level and in the secondary for high school level as well. And we're going to talk to the founder of, well, one of the founders of Real-Time Cases. Jake, you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about how you came into this business?
Yeah, Chris, so thanks a lot. So I got into this mostly because I really didn't like a lot of the way business was being taught. I tried some business classes early on. They were mostly conceptual or based on challenges way in the past. I did a case study on Circuit City and CarMax, and just wasn't, I wasn't gonna help Circuit City survive. And I didn't really like that. And I ended up doing environmental science, where you're constantly hands-on, constantly testing riverbeds, streams, digging, just, doing everything, in real time. And during that time, I had the ability to work in a venture capital firm that my dad actually started as their first analyst. So I was interviewing executives. I was helping CEOs with their challenges. I was doing due diligence for financial valuations, and really had to learn how to do a lot of things that I had no idea how to do. And from that, with the help of one of my fraternity brothers, we sort of honed in on how business was being taught and how we wanted to change it, and really focused in on the case study methodology, and sort of took my learning experience, different from his learning experience in the business school, and said, how could we translate this the best way? And we said, well, let's do it video. Let's go interview some executives and ask them what they're doing, and see if they're willing to share it, and if students and professors even care. And then we're able to get it into some classes, and interviewed the students and interviewed the professors, and they seemed to like it, and we just kept trying to make it better and better.
Yeah, so kind of echoing from a different interview and a little bit about what you just said, you discussed this idea of the disconnect between what students are entering in their professional work environment and what's being taught in these traditional higher education business curriculums. Then you talk about how the value of unstructured real-time education while working with an analyst in your father's firm. I wonder if you could kind of talk a little bit about, like, when you did go into your father's firm and you had to, like, figure things out for yourself, how was the thinking different? How was the goals you set different than you would, like, in a normal classroom? And why are there such two drastically different things?
Well, I didn't have a lot of direction at all. Basically, we started with just investments, and I had to learn how to do good due diligence just on companies, and also learn how to do financial modeling, which I'm still not fast in Excel, but you just figure it out, and that you have that unstructured environment. But then when it came to solving challenges, you're really trying to figure out, okay, what are all the inputs? What information do I have? And where do I spend my time finding more information? And in a traditional classroom, in a traditional case study, you're usually working on a challenge that's 20, 30 years old, maybe even further, and you know the context, you know what happened, you know a lot of the data, and you're really trying to figure out what page the answer's on. Say, okay, these are the levers that will affect the company moving forward, and I know that because the company ended up doing this. In many cases, you have very impartial information, and you just need to figure it out. And that's what I was learning while I was working for Swan, very on, which is the venture capital firm.
It's been a few years ago. JP Morgan has totally restructured since these days, but so back in the day, I was in New York having beers with a friend of mine who was working for JP Morgan, like in the first 3 years. All of his friends were in the same kind of first 3-year training, and none of them were business majors. Everyone was a philosophy major, a music major, an art major.
A lot of art history majors. Art history majors, for some reason, do pretty well in business and venture capital. I don't know why.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm asking about, is this kind of idea of where the critical thinking skills that people develop in these other disciplines solving problems across modalities, social construction of knowledge embedded in some kind of dialectic, for example, philosophy, the 360 systems thinking around a problem, for art history, the contextualization of the art to have to kind of not just deal with the emotive responses to it, but to what Roland Barthes calls the studium. The punctum is the emotive reaction, and then the studium is walking around and contextualizes in a political, social system. My impression of business majors was they were just so like needled in on this one thing, and they weren't necessarily like the creative types. So what is it like you're looking for people to kind of help build your business? What are these skill sets? Like, how would you talk about all this other kind of thinking that you're talking about getting from environmental sciences, from being out in the field doing the experiential work? What would you look for?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about internally in my business, I mean, you need a bunch of individualized skill sets. But in the end, what we're doing with our cases is we're allowing people to problem solve with sort of open-ended critical thinking. So critical thinking is something that actually the US does pretty well compared to a lot of other schools or a lot of other countries. Other countries beat the US in science, math, things like that, but the US does pretty well in critical thinking. The problem with critical thinking is when it's taught, though, is it's usually taught in a box. And it's taught in the box of, a project or a concept. You say, look, these are the parameters of it. These are your inputs. How do we solve it? And the problem with that is that you cannot transfer that critical thinking into other situations. You cannot take that same sort of boxed environment that you were in and apply it to something new. People who are used to working in scenarios where they're uncomfortable, where there's inputs they don't know, inputs they haven't heard of, and they're aware that they don't have all of the information, are able to actually do a lot better when it comes to problem solving, in my experience, because they're just aware of all of these externalities that aren't part of it. Business students are used to looking at finances, cap table, things like that, and saying this is what's there. And in a lot of cases, that's not all that's there. And there's lots of solutions that your professor hasn't thought of, that you haven't thought of. There's always more information that can be gathered. There's not a limit on the information that's known. The same way, a science project might be, but even with science project, as we learn more and more, there's tons of information that, we just didn't get. And people who are used to or able to really feel comfortable in uncomfortable situations and have data thrown at them and information in many different situations, and then also figure out how to go find that information, are just, I see them being very successful. You can always collect data and information, but it takes effort, and people have to figure out where to put that effort. Like, okay, I can spend $100,000 and another 6 months getting more information about this market or something, but will it really help me make a better decision? Or is it more important to just do something and iterate from there, because we'll learn more just by doing it?
So looking at your platform and the videos of the case studies, I was immediately thinking about learning design. Like, let's break learning into kind of a what, how, and why. And what I feel like you're providing is a great augmentation to the what, the content videos that you're producing of embedding these problems in real life scenarios, which lends itself to this incredible why. Like, why are we going to learn all these things? And that's that kind of narrative framing of the whole learning. Then the lectures they go through will have that much more immediate application. My big question was, how do you interact in any kind of partnership with the professors using the material? So for example, you're producing content, not producing content, but a pathway to kind of a pedagogical shift. Does the service bridge into working with professors in shifting the goal structure from a individualistic to a cooperative design, like more of a project design? How does that work? And how do you document or collect feedback from professors and students? How far does that partnership go with the users of the product?
Well, it depends on the professors. I mean, we are at the mercy of the professors, and they have full autonomy over their classroom. Professors that want to work with us, we absolutely try to share the knowledge that we've gained about how to teach a classroom. Flipped classroom methodology works pretty well. We try to teach them how to, or try to help them, create a powerful learning environment that in many ways is breaking down a lot of the traditional barriers that you might have for your students. And that's something we talk about all the time is there's a difference between being passionate about learning and about creating barriers to learning and trying to get rid of those barriers. Having written content is a barrier to learning for a lot of students nowadays. It's just, the moment they see a stack of 50 pages, they're going to get nervous. They're not going to feel comfortable. And in many cases, especially for undergraduates or high school students, they're just not going to read it. So as a professor, it's really, or an educator, it's really your job to facilitate learning. So there's a couple parts of that. There's the experiment in self-governance that you want your students to have, where they're saying, okay, how do we figure this out? Who's in charge? Who isn't? How, can we work as a team, which is one of the most important parts of solving any challenges, because you're going to need different skill sets that you're not good at. And then the other part of it is how well can I break down these barriers for my students so that they're able to do as much learning as possible. Video makes things easier for a lot of students. Audio makes things easier for a lot of students. Having things that are happening right now and that students can instantly relate to breaks down a barrier to students. If I do something 20 years ago, it's hard for me to put myself in that context as well. And so it's, that's kind of, what we try to push professors to do with our content is really break down those barriers. And then when they're learning, make sure they're learning the most relevant topics. And just as a side effect of learning the most relevant topics, students are going to be more engaged. That's one of the barriers, is when they're studying something that's not relevant to them, they will not be as engaged. If it's a brand that they know, it's a brand that they use, if it's a concept that they like, it's a time period that they happen to live in, those are all barriers that you have eliminated and facilitated more engagement for your students with.
As I'm listening to you, sorry, I'm appearing as a text right there. I'll show that in a second. No, as I'm listening to you, I'm just kind of like reflecting on my 20 years of teaching in the classroom, and I'm thinking like, wow, when I first went into it, I literally went into it with the same perspective that you did. Like, motivation and engagement was number one. Like, I would do anything to make sure the kids were motivated and engaged. Before I even understood larger pedagogies and all these other nuances of teaching reading and writing to kids, I did not want my kids to come to school and just kind of be tuned out. Like I really wanted to capture their attention. So I feel like what you're getting at is just that. What I was trying to show here, let me screen share this real fast. This is pulled from the webinar that's on you guys' YouTube page. And what I was looking at here was when you say cases can assess the application of concepts to complex real world situations, including building analytical skills, distinguish high priority from low priority elements, working in groups on cases that also help students develop interpersonal skills and the capacity to work in a team, and goals that some instructors rate highly. These are goals that instructors rate highly and evaluate. And I'm kind of exposing myself. You can see that I write out a lot of my questions beforehand to make sure that I ask them correctly. So what we're looking at here is kind of this scope of moving from a traditional foundation kind of teaching into your most kind of free learning environment, where the larger learning outcomes will often go unnoticed or unmeasured. And yet you're talking about these experientials that are vital and critical to the work environment. We'll get to kind of how Google hires in a second. But I wonder if you could kind of walk us through what does this look like? Like, do you engage with any classrooms that actually take this out into the field, into action learning projects? Or are these merely sort of guidelines for professors to kind of think about how far to push the material?
Well, it usually goes in stages. I mean, just like you can see here, you want to start and build a foundation to this type of learning. And sometimes it's good to have more structure because throwing students into a situation very unstructured, very real, and is difficult. It's uncomfortable and it's difficult, and you do need to sort of scaffold the learning experience throughout the years that students are engaging. The challenge is you can't just do it for 1 year or 1 semester. You want to make sure that you're actually building off of what you had earlier. So, I mean, professors are not only teaching how to work in a group and then solve challenges, solve projects together. They also have a requirement to teach individual concepts and theories just as part of their class. And if students don't understand these concepts and theories like blue ocean strategy or other business concepts, they're not going to be able to solve a lot of these higher level problems. So first they get, they see these problems. Traditional cases, I absolutely think there's a place for them. You can teach students how to do some critical thinking in a box. Once they get that there are inputs and you need to find them to be able to solve the problem. Then you get into situations where, okay, you don't know all the inputs. Let's try to build off of those. And then the professor takes all the concepts and theories that they've been trying to define in their classroom that the students may or may not get. And they say, apply this concept or theory to this challenge and then put it in a direction. So, it has to be scaffolded to a point. Otherwise, it is difficult for many students. I mean, this type of learning is difficult, and you need to prove that there were certain learning objectives reached and certain learning outcomes were hit along the way. And many times, those are through the concepts or theories that you say, okay, the student learned this concept or theory, and now they're able to apply it to whatever challenge that they're working on, and they didn't fight with the other students or whatever.
Looking at other similar models that are in movement in higher ed of how experiential learning is being put into play. I saw that I think it's Edu-cause had like a dashboard where they can collect analytics as the students are in motion. What are you guys doing with data? Like, how are you collecting from teacher students? And what are you doing with that?
I mean, most of the data, the information that we have is around just simple engagement with videos and satisfaction from professors and students. What do they think they learned? Do they understand concepts better? Things like that. But we are not super data driven. And that's one of the difficult parts is, eventually we want to be more data driven, but a lot of this is hard to measure. And it really comes down to how well they can problem solve and how well they can back up an answer. Traditionally, that's education is get me the right answer, and here it's how do you back up that answer.
Yeah, and just before we started recording, you were talking about like belief systems that the teachers that I have seen that embrace project-based learning, embrace experiential learning. Usually it's because of a belief system. They believe in this pedagogy for a much larger reason. They don't need the measurement. In fact, the measurement may ruin it. I mean, I'm all for collecting some ethnographics, but like once we start trying to put hard measures on collaborative skills, and then thinking, okay, well, how does a third grader collaborate? How does a ninth grader collaborate? I feel like we're kind of missing the human factor, the point there, that it's a dispersed knowledge and dispersed ability framework that you want to be present. But I was thinking more like for your own benefit, even to spread the word that ethnographics, for example, can be a very powerful tool to show documentaries and trajectories of what does it look like before the students start, what looks like during, what looks like after, so that there's more of a clear message of what's happening in these larger learning outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that for us, our biggest thing is we want to see, do students get jobs out of this? Are they more sought after? And that's something that's going to take time. I mean, we've been around for really operating for about 2 years. Started this about 3 years ago, so it's going to take some time to see if these students are end up very successful or more successful than their counterparts. But one of the hardest parts is really grading this. I mean, that's professors just they have a lot of trouble with grading the system.
So looking at Seth Godin's alt MBA, his criticism was that traditional education, he says, their curriculum is hands-on. More than 75% of their time is spent producing work, meaning that they'll learn concepts and immediately put them into action. Last year, I read the book by James Paul G, What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy, which doesn't sound so serious. It's the best read on education environments I've had, probably one of the top 3 reads. And he talks about this immediate application of knowledge. So for example, this week, I knew I'd be talking to you. I knew it would be live. I wanted the product of the conversation to be meaningful. So the purpose was embedded in the readings. Everything I read, went to a point. I'm trying to ask certain things and probe into your business strategy and the trajectory of what you're doing. And more than that, as I'm doing it, I have to make up questions. So you put all these things into play, and it gives this kind of utility to the knowledge that I'm trying to gain, just to have this intense moment. But what I would like to separate is kind of this idea of, do you ever think, and this doesn't have to be in your business, this could just be personal belief, but in a learning strategy, what worries me about Maker Ed, project-based learning, of all these experiential learning environments, the larger outcomes are beautiful, but it's always kind of putting this utilitarian edge to knowledge, that everything has to be put to immediate, transferable, applicable use, as opposed to the idea of throwing a million stars out there, and that eventually you're going to start connecting them. But you might just learn things out of pure wonder and delight of learning those things, but you may not even know why you need that until 15, 20 years down the road.
Well, a lot of the thoughts here is that if you don't get exposed to things and don't truly get exposed to them by actually doing them, you don't actually know what it's like. So my business partner who founded this with me was an accounting and finance major. He hates accounting and finance. He just and he got straight A's in it. He killed all of his classes. It's not something he really wanted to do. It's not something he even understood what the practical application of doing it was. It's like you don't want to throw yourself all the way into every single challenge that you're working on as a student, to the point where it's like I'm down this road and this is where I end up. But you need to get your feet wet enough so that you really understand what it's like to be in one of these situations, to actually solve a marketing problem, to actually solve an organizational behavior problem, or a finance problem, or a supply chain problem. If you don't approach these challenges to the point where it's at least a little real, and maybe it's through a video in the safety of the classroom, you don't actually know what it's like. And I think there's a lot of learning that that happens at sort of more epiphany type, moments where it's like, I learned something that's very cool and I didn't expect it. They absolutely happen in those moments as well. But I have studied a lot of things that once I got a little more into them, I realized, that's not what I like, or this is what I like. And many times you're so surface level, or you're so memorization based, or something else, that you just don't know. And you haven't gotten deep enough to really understand what being a marketer means, or being a supply chain expert means, or something like that.
Yeah, on this idea of kind of like, you need not just the experience, but the responsibility to develop this kind of sense of agency over your work. Referring to Project Zero has the Dr. Mara Krzyzewski, I hope I said her name correctly. But in one of her readings, she describes the ethical, aesthetic, effective connection to learning that's usually facilitated through a project environment. And it's often characterized by driving questions and some kind of application of the knowledge through a product. Case-based study seems to flow between challenge-based, problem-based, and project-based learning, depending on how far, I guess, the professor takes it. Ideally, how would you like your material to be applied? Like, what's the most dreamy kind of environment? How much student-driven problem finding would you put in? How much collaborative product would you put in?
I mean, I think it would need to, we would need to take a lot of different, sort of companies and information and modalities and bring them together. I don't think ours is the end-all be-all solution. I think it's a building block. And I would love to see it used sort of to create a feedback loop in both directions. And this is something that we're looking at doing more and more now, is that not just the students want to work on these challenges, but the companies internally want to work on these challenges, and they want the students to help throw ideas at them while they work on it. My ideal solution would be to set up a relationship. We'll make up a company here where we go in, we profile a company, we create all of these video cases and challenges around that company. We then put those challenges out to 5-6 schools that company has engaged with or recruits from or something like that. And then we allow students to work on all of these challenges and get feedback from leaders in the company who are currently working on those same things, and then can update new challenges as they go through it. And then later,
sorry, just sticking there real fast on that point right there, because as I was looking at material, I was just thinking, like, what a dream this would be. For one, doing a kind of hybrid of half recorded video study and then half live interaction with the companies, and then carrying those partnerships out to the point where, like, when I first saw it, this is what I was like, oh my God, it's this. It's what's this kind of modular learning that we've been dreaming of. It's like someone's come in and said, this is what universities need. The system's not necessarily broken. We just need to tweak it. Kids could be studying this, and at the same time, interacting with the professors, with the business live at certain points, maybe even going and doing internships on making it more of a two-way partnership where you really are in real time suggesting real life, solutions to these problems. Just like the potentials for how to use this material just kind of started going all directions.
Oh yeah, and these companies also, they have a bunch of learning frameworks and theories that they internally apply to all of their challenges. They say, look, we use the SMART system for everything, or we use whatever. And then after these professors have taught these cases for years, what's to stop the professors from coming in and then having profiled this company, help these companies internally by taking their own concepts and theories and say, why don't you try out this strategy or whatever else? And you can create these incredible two-way feedback loops between companies and schools with content. The companies want to engage with schools, and the schools want to engage with companies. They just have not found a scalable way to do it yet. And I think through cases and through content is the way to do it. We can help a company turn their challenges into academic challenges. I mean, that's a big problem for them. Is we spend a lot of our time going into a company and translating it for academia. We have to match up disciplines with departments, and we have to do all these things to make any sense to a professor. And then the other way around, a lot of these professors have great insights, but it's all things that would need to be translated to a company the same way. They say, look, our problem is a marketing and it's a supply chain problem. Well, marketing professor is going to be like, look, I'm a marketing professor. And they get better and better at a more specific group of a more and more specific subject, and that's just that's how they work. And I think when you do most of the upfront work through the content, you can always scale a relationship that's way more valuable off of that. And you could say, look, there's a reason why you did that content, because now let's jump into the problem. And let's work on it, and let's have feedback, and that would be the ideal for me.
No, it sounds like the more I was looking at it, kind of walking around it, I got more and more excited. I was looking at By the way, I'm getting a pulsating beep on this end.
Yeah, I was wondering what that was.
It's coming from my side or your side. I'm going to do
I've been exiting out of a lot of things trying to, I don't think it's on my side.
Take a very brief pause, just close a couple of things and see if it's anything on my end. Okay. Oh, it seems to have stopped. There it is again. Okay, well, we'll just leave it as some sort of very slow RPM techno music playing in the background. Well, let's talk about where a lot of this stuff, I don't know if it originates from, but I know like Stanford University jumped on this stuff really early. And this whole idea of contextualizing learning within these case-based studies. And one of the things they talked about, let me just read the little blurb I took from their publication. Says, what engages students most is a case that tells a story. A good case presents an interest-provoking view and promotes empathy within the central characters. It delineates their individual perspectives and personal circumstances well enough to enable students to understand the character's experience of the issue. The importance of the compelling issue and the empathetic character reflects the fact that cases typically focus on the intersection between organizational or situational dynamics and individual perception, judgment, and action. You can hear the thread of design thinking and empathy-based learning, through the whole thing. We've talked about in the podcast of narrative being this ultimate kind of human technology for packing information. When you're capturing your case studies, you said you had to do a lot of interpreting of making sure that the cases made sense to the disciplines within academia, which I find absolutely hilarious. Yeah. How do you guide your case studies toward narratives so that they do kind of hit with this empathetic impact and create this narrative experience? And how do you find that students and professors gravitate more towards those cases that create a more kind of emotive response to a story? What are your experiences there?
Well, so one of and this is actually a huge thing for me, is I don't know how you can feel super empathetic without seeing the person. So when I would read a case, you read about these cases, and you'd be like, why wouldn't this person just fire this guy? I mean, seems miserable, whatever. But then when you watch a video and they're talking about a situation, you can see their emotions. You can see, that 90% of nonverbal communication that they have. I mean, that's some of the biggest parts of these challenges. Is on paper, a lot of them seem, not as difficult as they are, but when you're actually in it, when things are emotional, when there's people involved, when there's people's livelihoods, when you're a leader, when they've been at the company for years, or they or whatever it is, I mean, those are hard. Those are the challenges that people are not used to. These sort of interpersonal relationships are the things people are getting worse and worse at, and those are the things that students really really need to learn to be good at, and that empathy is a huge part of it. Is people can be sympathetic everywhere, but empathy and being empathetic takes something out of you. It's like it's you really need to give yourself to a challenge, and I just think the fact that it's happening now, and you see the person on camera, and you say, like, look, this person is pouring their heart out, or they're actually a pretty reserved person, or they're really methodical, or they're charismatic and they're out there. I mean, that's a huge part of it. And in many cases, you'll see professors will choose things because of brands or because someone's charismatic on camera. But some of the best cases are those guys who are super boring, or you wouldn't necessarily expect, but they say these little things that or they have these small tweaks in you could see every time they bring somebody up or whatever, it bugs them or something, and it just I mean, I just think those are the best cases, and you could be more empathetic with that.
Yeah, you were talking before about how look, we've all been in graduate school at some point, and I remember graduate courses that were just so intense where the readings were 300, 400 pages between classes, and you just know that you're not going to get to it all. So you just kind of read that one section so you can sound like you know what you're talking about in class, so you don't kind of embarrass yourself. But what you're talking about more is this kind of transmedia approach to teaching, where you're going to watch this part on a video, and you're going to get that sort of, it's not face-to-face, but you're going to get a much more kind of empathetic lens into what's going on. Then the text will make much more sense to you and have this kind of immediate applications we've talked about. That's really fascinating. And then, if you kind of move up the pyramid that you guys were talking about, this the real-time messiness of experiential learning, then to actually be out on site and to do some of the ethnographics, to walk through the shoes of the consumer or the owner of the business as well. Those are just kind of fascinating things to explore. Let's talk about these ideas of the larger learning outcomes. We've kind of been talking around them, and it's a big issue because it's part of all this project-based learning. It's part of what companies are screaming for. We keep talking about like how Google hires and what they look for, which is a very different skill set from what universities are necessarily producing. So looking back at this Stanford reading, it says that cases can assess the application of concepts to complex real-world situations, including building analytical skills that distinguish between high priority and low priority elements, which you kind of talked about, of like this idea that on the work site, you learn really quickly what to pay attention to and what's important.
Chris, I think I found the pulse.
Oh, good. Was it techno music just slowed down to like 60 RPMs or?
It is.
I live in Bogota. I'm looking at my window right now, just like a huge traffic scene. So the idea of background pulses and noises, very accustomed to. Saturdays and Sundays are woken up to. They don't. This is totally off tangent, but Latin America, there's the screaming kind of sellers on the street. They're selling avocados. But in Bogota, they're pretty high tech, and so they have megaphones on recorded loops.
Oh, that's not.
The guy's just pushing a wagon, and it's just recorded loop screaming, strawberries for sale or whatever they're selling. Anyway, back to this idea of larger learning outcomes. In the webinar, Jennifer Stecklau talks about this kind of scale of messiness. We talked about this idea of the foundational studies all the way up into kind of the complete open, more ill-formed problems that you might find in the workplace. I wonder what, going back to kind of your experience as a student in environmental studies, your buddy's experience with business, and how are some of these different, like the goals within the learning? Goal seems to be a very big topic of the goal structure of the learning. Is it individualistic? Is it collaborative? Is it competitive? And the different kind of achievement outcomes you get from that. But speaking of these larger learning outcomes, the open collaborative models, peer relations, how different roles emerge once you start tweaking the learning environment. What are your experiences, and what do you see happening with your program as far as the way students achieve differently? Does that make sense?
A little bit. I could get into.
It's kind of all over the place. Well, let's just stick to the achievement question. Like, when an achiever that in this environment, what do you hope to get at, or what have you seen? And then maybe with your own experiences, having been both within a formal schooling environment and in a more experiential environment, and with the work you did in your dad's firm, the analytic work, like how are the leadership roles and achievement outcomes different as you kind of tweak those different environments?
For students, my goal is that any student that goes through this sort of structured experiential learning where they're thrown into challenges, that they have enough confidence in themselves by seeing the things they're not good at and the things that they are good at, to be able to approach any problem and say, look, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I can do, especially as part of a team. Because almost every single challenge you're going to run into, it's going to be a team challenge, and it's going to be something that you're going to have to figure out that self-governance part. And after a while, you might say, look, I'm really good with the analytics. I'm not a salesperson, but I'm good with the analytics. Or I am a salesperson, but I don't touch numbers, or something like that. And students should have that confidence. They should have seen enough stuff that they know what they're good at, and they know what they're not so good at. And not everyone has to be a leader. being a leader sometimes just means, really believing in yourself and understanding what you are good at. You could be a leader and say, I'm not going to worry about, who's in charge or the majority of the information or directing it. I'm going to do a really good job at what I'm good at. And that's really my hope there, is that students just, they get that confidence in themselves because they've approached enough challenges to know the things they're good at, the things they're not good at. And then also they figure out where they need to supplement their own skills. There are plenty of things that I'm very bad at. For one, I'm disorganized, and I have people who absolutely help me with that. And I would be, nowhere if I didn't have people who could help me with organization. I mean, it's always been a challenge. I've gotten better at it, but it's not something that I chose to be really good at. I mean, you can't be really good at everything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, going back to this idea of how Google hires. Now, I know not every company is Google. Not every company has the screaming talent trying to wedge into those positions. But a couple of factors are echoing off of things you're saying. One is that I think 14% of their employees are not college educated, and in some teams even higher, and that percentage is continuing to grow. And it's something they actually they say they look for, because they say that someone who's has created achievement and accomplishment outside of the university system has probably had to work a lot harder at it. Has probably had to work a lot through this kind of collaborative model that you're talking about, of knowing what I'm good at. I guess this idea of collective intelligence, of using the people around you because you know that they're better at those things, and the different ways that leadership manifests in these environments, to where they look at people who are staunchly can defend their opinion or their project, or with the way they think the project should go, but as soon as they are enlightened with new information, are ready to step back and let someone else move forward. So this kind of much more less individualistic kind of approach to learning and working environments is what I feel like you're talking about. And I guess that comes back to this idea of, so much of the stuff I know is out of your control, because you say you have to work around the professor's will. But if the professors are getting into case studies, I assume they're trying to create something like this business environment within their classrooms. So that students can actually experience these things.
I mean, professors are trying, but professors also have a lot of incentives that are not focused on teaching the students. And most tenured faculty get tenure through research, and that's just that's what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of them do amazing research, and if they're doing what the system requires, that's it's not really their fault in a lot of ways. But one of our things is we want to make it easy for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, believe me, that goes all the way K-12 environment as well. Is that there's a criteria for everyone. Students have a criteria. This is the game. I mean, if you were to say that education is a game, these are the way the rules of the game are played. Here's your criteria for achievement. Here is your criteria for a teacher, which may have nothing to do with these larger learning outcomes. Now, those may be things that we all kind of adhere to, and it's part of our belief system, so we want to create them. But the hardcore criteria for a successful teacher is hardly that, unless you're like at a high-tech high or at a school that really embraces that philosophy, and it kind of permeates the environment. I wonder if you could talk a little about logistics, so people kind of have a picture of what this looks like. Let's say someone is actually listening that is thinking about buying into this, and they want to implement it. And by the way, this is for secondary school as well. It's not just for universities. Like high school juniors and seniors could also get involved with this. What would it look like? What would their kind of options be for how to get to it, to learn about it, and to adopt it?
Well, a lot of it, depends on their students as well. Most students, from what, at least the ones that we've targeted are pretty tech savvy. They have cell phones, they've got computers, things like that. One of the easiest ways is, you can get on our website and you can make an account and you can view any of the cases. And then we're also available all the time with our instructional design team, and their job is to help facilitate learning and figure out your inputs and help you create a good learning environment inside of your classroom. That's one of the coolest things, is that just with technology today, you can, I mean, these things are accessible from anywhere. You could tell your students, watch these videos, do some research, show up to class, and we're going to have a discussion. And sometimes that will help you decide where you're going to go next. And you have these amazing experiences through that. I mean, logistically, it's fairly easy. You get, you'll create a course, you get a code that you can send your students, and then they create an account on our platform. They can watch any video, or the videos you chose on their cell phone. And a lot of it comes down to, I mean, again, it's the professors. Are you comfortable with doing that? Are you comfortable with not knowing the answers, with letting the conversation maybe go in a direction that you might not have expertise in, but the students are really interested in? We'll do our best to help you facilitate a good learning environment. But I mean, it comes down to the professors. More and more students are going to be able to influence the type of learning they're doing. But professors are there for a reason. Professors are there because there are things to be taught, and it shouldn't always be fully student driven. But if you need to create an environment where you can excite students enough, and you can say, there's a reason why you're learning this.
Yeah, no, I get this kind of, you've developed a platform that could sort of be blended in or flipped in very different levels of the scope, from, almost pure online learning to, periodic kind of check-ins with professors, to full on integrated. When you started, well, let's just talk about how you started, because the idea of startups in education is a really fast-moving, exciting world. I know you were listed on Forbes magazine as the 30 under 30 to watch in education. That's really exciting. I mean, some really cool other projects in there too. But this is really exciting stuff for those of us that are sort of in education, maybe even looking to provide service from the outside. I talk to many educators, many directors of schools who are looking at, I would like to keep contributing. I would like to develop some cool modular study. How did you do it? Like, how did it get started? I know it started as a conversation in a dorm room in university, and then where did it go from there?
Well, so the biggest, and after being in venture capital and being around a lot of startups and things, and also having my own here, I've realized that the biggest barrier to entry for any company is doing something. People talk all the time and say, oh, I've got this great idea, or I had the Uber idea years ago, but they didn't actually do anything. The moment you do something, you make it real, and you figure out what your next steps are. There might be 600 steps that we need to do steps 1 through 600, and people love talking about 500 through 600. They love talking about, oh, we're gonna go all over the world. We're gonna do all these other things. But they don't usually talk about steps 1 through 10, which are the steps that you're on. And those are the ones that you really care about. I mean, we had this really grandiose idea, and we said, what's the most basic version of it, and what are the assumptions we want to test? How do we boil this thing down and test those assumptions? We said, okay, our initial assumptions are that students and professors will be more engaged and care more about about having cases that are video-based and real-time. Those are the first assumptions. So we said, how can we test that? And so we went and we filmed with an executive or a CEO of this company, Wedding Wire, and got the first challenge and asked a couple professors, would you be willing to put this in your class, and can we survey the students? And they said yes. I don't know why, but they said it. And then we got it in and got good feedback, and then we just kept replicating it and testing more and more assumptions. I mean, it was so simple, and it took so little effort, didn't take any money, and the vast majority of these companies, they don't take any money to test these assumptions. You can build a website in 2 hours that looks great, and test assumptions. It would be doing something. And those are the steps people don't think about. People always think about the the farther along steps, but you can very easily test something, quickly. And then once you learn more and more, you'll get to the point where you actually have to build a model and you say, okay, is this viable with financing and things? But before that, does anybody care? And we didn't need a platform and beautiful videos and all these things to test that assumption.
I think it was Elon Musk. Yesterday I saw this in the news where he said starting a business is like grinding glass between your teeth. What are your most frustrating moments or biggest disappointments so far?
I mean, a lot of them come down to sort of lapses in my own leadership. I have always, I'm always about doing. We had things to be done, and in our company. And in a lot of cases, I would rather, and sometimes was rather harsh about, we need to do something and move forward rather than arguing about exactly the details of how to do it. Because you learn, you really learn the rest of it without planning a ton. I mean, most businesses, if you want to get it to be done quickly, you build it agile. You say, okay, what's the basic version of it? Create that. Then we figure out more things, by engaging with customers, create that, sort of that lean business model. I mean, that's the way the way I would approach it. And many times, and most people are not designed to work in a startup environment. And so it can be very, very hard to keep navigating and shifting people's attention. It's difficult, and I've learned so much more now. I think I'm a better leader now, but early on I was not a fantastic leader. I did the best I could with what I knew, and and those are some of the tougher moments. Was just figuring out how to balance a lot of things, and also take care of people. You're on this rocket that could bring everybody up, but could also mess with people. People leave their jobs, they leave stable things, they have kids, they've got a house, they got a mortgage. They leave to join some snot-nosed 20-year-old's company, and then we don't actually need that anymore, or those kind of things happen all the time. And it's and those are difficult, and in most cases you need to really plan for everything, just so you thought about it.
Next question is kind of double loaded, because part of it is like your vision for the company, but how would you like to see it go? Where would you like to be in a couple of years, in 5 years? And the second question is much bigger. What role do you feel like that these kind of modules of study or these kind of startups are changing the university system and are perhaps helping a very old and antiquated model shift?
So first, I would love to basically create a system where any school can say, we want to engage with companies and we want to engage in these ways, and we help facilitate that. And then any company can say, we want to engage with schools, for schools to companies, and companies to schools. I mean, and we were able to pull in people who are very good at specific things. Some people very good at technology, some people very good at content, things like that. And just create those kind of that feedback loop relationship that I talked about earlier. That would be ideal, because companies want to engage with schools, schools want to engage with companies, and students are only benefiting from it. And so that would be the goal, to get to a point where we could, where anybody in education, whether student, professor, administrator, provost, dean, could come to us and say, we want to engage with companies. What are my options? And we could provide that. And then, this type of learning, was that the question was more about this type of learning, or just?
Yeah, no, I was thinking more like, there's a lot of talk about the need for a shift, and you've mentioned it in a lot of your comments, this idea of anti-disciplinary study, for example, where kids are actually not necessarily in one discipline, but moving between a lot of disciplines.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the MIT labs,
Yeah.
more recent projects of, actually publishing and doing research in an anti-disciplinary environment where the research itself is kind of almost, I don't want to call it Wikipedia, but anyone can continue to critique it, and it continues to evolve. So that the way I understand it, from what I looked at, was that you can publish research across different disciplines, because most research is going to be strictly published for this particular journal, for this particular discipline. No one else is going to look at it. And so that would be like one example of how to move to a more interdisciplinary model. But what I was thinking more was how to make universities more agile so that they can have and outsource these kind of experiences. And it, could potentially become a thing, like where, oh, that course is a modular course, and that's the course where you're going to have this experiential, set of activities here, but you're going to have these classroom set of activities here, and you could, go back and forth between classroom and experiential environment, so to speak.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen with companies trying to approach these issues, is they either figure out a business, and it comes down to a business model. They either figure out a business model where they can sell at a very high level and implement downwards, like an LMS, like Blackboard or whoever else, and professors don't want to adopt it. It's like, screw you, sorry, you got to adopt it. Or you have business models like Coursera, which completely bypass the professors, and they say, look, anybody can come and they can do this, but then they have very low completion rates because they don't have the scaffolding, they don't have a professor, and they a lot of times don't have that same drive. I think companies like ours and similar companies, what we need to do is we need to be on the professor's side. We cannot be against them, and we cannot force them to do things. Because that is not going to work. They are the subject matter experts, and they are also the people who dedicated their lives to teaching and to doing this. And even if they got caught up in research, at some point they thought, I want to teach students, and I want to help, really help them be better at this subject. And so it would be taking a lot of the existing learning frameworks and learning systems and adopting those for the 21st century. I mean, the case study methodology has been around since 1906. It's not new. It's been around for a long time, and there's a reason why it's been around for a long time, because it's good. There's a reason why universities have been around for a long time, because in the end they're pretty good. They do something that's very needed. We just took that exact same methodology and we said, look, we love that methodology. We're just going to make it for the 21st century. And we're going to make it easy for a professor to adopt it, and easy to change, and easy to stay up to date, and easy to engage their students, and things like that. And if I saw, I would love to see more companies really taking a lot of the existing models that are there, and a lot of this sort of knowledge that has been developed over hundreds of years at universities, and just adapted that for professors, because there's a reason why things have been done those ways. I don't think they need to be 100% done the same, but be on the professor's sides, because they're your biggest advocates in the end. They're the ones who dedicated their lives to this. Don't bypass them. Don't tell them they're out of date, or you're not doing it right, or whatever else. Don't force them to do things. Take a lot of the knowledge that they have, bring them into your organization, have them collaborate with you, and then build off of the systems that already exist. Because there are a lot of great learning systems that just haven't been adapted or evolved for 100 years, like the case study methodology. The biggest adaptation of the case study methodology that I've seen in 100 years besides us is to do short cases, to do cases that are a couple pages long instead of 50 pages long. I mean, professors and academia does move very slow. But we know the systems that work, and we can move quickly, and we can help them, and they can help us. And so that's what I would really like to see is actually a lot less of this sort of attacking professors, and a lot more of the how can we make this easier for you, because you're the one that's going to help us. It's kind of like you're a bartender, if you go to a bar, is going to be your biggest advocate for trying a new beer.
I love the analogy from beer tasting to professors. No, I love what you're doing, and I'm in full agreement. I really think that like one of the cool pathways this could take is let professors teach the best way they know how. Not all professors were ever even trained in any way about teaching and learning. We kind of assume that when kids get to that age that they already have that stuff figured out. I mean, I know in my small liberal arts school, I don't even know when people talk about the broken like university system, it never sounds like my school. I went to a small liberal arts school in Georgetown, Texas, Southwestern, and everything was based on a dialectic. Every test was a written essay test. There was no such thing as a multiple choice test. You knew your professors. You went over to their house for dinner. You conversed with them. Office hours were sort of an expected thing that you have to come by and talk through what you're working on. So all, small seminar classes, like all these things that I feel like I hear when I hear about big universities are often not in place. But what I think you're working at is this agile model that could really break up that system and put in some real experiential, skills that will be very applicable when they get out. Just like people want to take a gap year before they go to college, so they can kind of figure out some of the purpose and meaning behind all this study, so that university isn't just this rite of passage. And we do look at it as like this you're going to go to university and you're going to find yourself. You're going to transform into something else. We really look at it as this like incubator for this next person you're going to be. The rest of the world doesn't necessarily think like that. Here in Latin America, these kids know who they are when they're 10. Like their sense of identity is really well developed at an early age. And they may go to university and develop and branch out. But a lot of those, they don't necessarily look at it in the same transformative way I think that the United States does, where it's kind of like, go there and work on becoming what you're going to be.
Go through this journey or whatever else.
Yeah. So let's borrow a little technique from Tim Ferriss. I'm not sure if you listen to him, but I continue to listen to him more and more. And one of the things he asks people to talk about is just like what's inspiring them, what they're reading, what they're getting into. Could be something academic or something experiential. What are you into right now?
I mean, usually, and it's funny because people ask me all the time, what am I reading? And I created a company based on videos so that I didn't have to read, because that's how I learn. But I still do a little bit of reading. And recently, in another interview, my business partner mentioned I read a book called Uncommon Service, about customer service, and basically it's how to create an internal environment, create structure in your company that forces good customer service. That it's not even, it's not about having that one person who's fantastic and just really personable, but you create a system where it's like no matter what, people are going to get good customer service because it's just built into your operations. And that's a great book because especially for startups, you're selling yourself and you're selling your people more than your product. Most of the time, you don't have the product you want, and you have to sell people on an idea, and they have to like you, and they have to like your system. And the way that you make up for a lot of it is by having great customer service. We are available all the time. Any professor, you want to call us. It doesn't matter if you're paying us or not. We're there to help you. And that's just something we have to do and something we believe in. And that was a great book I read. Another one is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That one's a fantastic one, and it really shows strengths and weaknesses and how you can balance them together. And it follows a hypothetical tech company that should be winning in Silicon Valley, but they're not. Is a great one for me. And then, what else what else inspires me?
Yeah, like I was, the academic stuff is wonderful. Like I love hearing how this kind of growth mindset, which is a big term in education, of that collaborative skills are something you can develop that you may not have very well at all. I've never been or thought of myself as a good public speaker, and here I am doing podcasts, as a hobby. So, but like, you know, Tim Ferriss focused on this kind of idea of habits, like the habits that you instill in your life. And I think it has to do with this idea of like you become what you do. So, what activities you engage in. For example, I recently started working on jumping rope just because it varies my workouts so that I don't rely on running or swimming too much, but I can really get into it. And lately I've just like love it. Like it's something I actually look forward to, is going and burning out 30 minutes on the jump rope, and it kind of clears my head before I go back into the next thing. So Jake, where can people find you? Can you just kind of blurb out like people want to connect? Where's your website? Where else can they find you in any kind of social media?
Yeah, our website is realtimecases.com. We've got a Facebook. We've got a Twitter. You can tweet at me. I think I'm just Jake Schaufeld at Twitter. My email is jake@realtimecases.com. Happy to have any emails or engage with anybody. I'm learning all the time. I have been lucky enough to hire people who are way smarter than me, who know the industry way better than me, and I've been really facilitating a learning experience for our company by bringing in people who complement a lot of things I'm bad at. So
well, really impressive engaging with your team. I was like blown away. Like usually I'll write somebody, they might write back, or maybe they write back like a couple of days later, and you guys are just on it. Like literally I would write an email and within 20 minutes I've got a response. Things were just kind of popping as soon as we decided to connect.
Customer service.
Yeah, no, it sounds very cool. Hey, well, best of luck to you. It would be great to touch base in the future and see how things develop. And I love kind of like learning about the model of how these things are developing. It looks like a really, really cool product you guys are developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot. And if anybody has any questions or anything, especially about starting and a lot of those steps 1 through 10, I've been through those. So I'm happy to help wherever is needed, because we would not be here without the help we got from other entrepreneurs and such.
Well, I'll just throw out there too, is having sifted through a lot of your material, the videos are great. Playful is a great animated video. Then there's another one, I think you're just pitching and a scene where you're like riding a scooter rapidly down the hall. I don't know how you coordinated the vocals for that, but that was pretty cool as well. So very playful, the videos, and very honest about like what you guys are trying to produce. Very cool. Well, I'm gonna disconnect here, and if you would stay on the line just for a second so we can kind of close down. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris.